Hello, and thanks for tuning in tonight to Answers for the Paranormal. We're glad you're with us. This is Bill Posey, and I'm your host for the broadcast tonight. And with me in his office over in Horsham, PA, is my co-host, Joe Marodi. How's it going tonight, Joe?
It's going great, Bill. It's going great. Not enjoying the weather, though. The 50 to 60 mile an hour winds that have been banging my house all day and, affecting everything that's around us. And then we have some forecasted snow for this weekend. So, unfortunately, the parade that was scheduled for the global warming awareness, that had to be canceled because of snow. I'm sorry, I just had to get that in. I'd love to get shots in on the global warmers.
Oh, I know. And, I saw that forecast up for the weekend, Joe, and I actually chuckled because it's just like, all right, it's supposed to be spring, but, here we are having to deal with another round of snow. And it's just been turned around completely backwards. We had a winter that we didn't really have anything, and now the spring. This is like what, storm number 6, something like that.
Coming up, yeah. Hey, don't worry, Bill. If the global warmers are right, then we'll all be scorched soon enough. Okay?
Yeah, that's.
So let's enjoy the moderation while it lasts. Okay? Before we're all scorched to death.
All right. Well, again, we are Answers for the Paranormal. Our web address is www.answersfortheparanormal.org. So look us up on the net. Check us out. If you have a question or a comment you'd like to send to either Joe or myself, you'll find right there on our webpage our contact tab. If you click on that, you'll see 2 email addresses there. So first one is Joe at answersfortheparanormal.org and William at answersfortheparanormal.org. Shoot us off an email. We'd be more than happy to enter into dialogue with you, talk to you about anything that is on your mind, any questions, or if you want to know more about salvation in Jesus Christ, we'd be more than happy again to speak with you. So go to our website, go to our email addresses, and shoot us off a message. All right, tonight we've titled our broadcast "Forsaking the Occult for Life in Jesus Christ," and we have a great interview set up for tonight. So, Joe, why don't you introduce our guest for tonight?
Yeah, tonight we have the great pleasure of welcoming ex-Umbanda spiritist medium of Brazil, Ivani Greppi, to Answers for the Paranormal. Ivani, welcome.
Hi, Joe. Hi, Bill. Thank you so much for having me.
Thank you, Ivani. It's really a pleasure for us to have you with us. We've been excited about this ever since I read your testimony that you had posted on Facebook. I got in touch with Joe the next day, and I said, Joe, we have to have Ivani on because this is a powerful testimony about what Jesus Christ has done in saving you and your family. So we've been very eager to have you on. So thanks for coming on with us tonight.
Thank you for having me. This is a blessing. Thank you.
Yeah, amen. All right, Joe. Let's get right into the questions that we have prepared for Ivani for tonight. So, Joe, I'm going to turn the microphone over to you. You go, brother.
All right, Bill. Thank you very much. And Ivani, I have a lot of questions as a result of the testimony, your testimony that I read online. It's really it's a fascinating and a powerful testimony, and I would encourage all those listening now and who will listen later via the podcast to go and read Ivani's testimony, and she'll give out her information at the end of the program. But We have a lot of questions that we want to get to tonight because this is an area that really needs to be addressed, especially in light of what is going on in our world today, and Ivani can shed a lot of light on that. So, Ivani, let's get right into it. From your testimony, you state that your European ancestors brought occult beliefs and rituals to the New World. What were they specifically, and why was Europe a hotbed of occultism?
Well, as far as Europe being a hotbed of occultism, as we know, the occult has been here throughout history. So it wasn't anything new at the time that my great-grandparents came from, on my maternal mother's side from Spain, on my father's side, his paternal grandparents from Italy. But I believe that probably it took off with Helena Blavatsky and Allan Kardec, who we'll speak about later on. He was from France. And that is still a huge following in Brazil. Allan Kardec is a spiritist, and I know you have questions for me about him later. But what they brought to Brazil are the beliefs and practices. On my father's side, my great-grandmother, who was from Sicily, she was a healer, and here it's called Strega or White Witch, and all she did was blessings and healings, but it was through the spiritual realm. Even though she wasn't considered a medium, she was called a healer. But she did, there was worship of other gods besides Jesus Christ, and again, with all these religions, and we'll get to that later, there's the mixture of, Catholicism with the occult. So that was on my father's side, believing in the spirit realm and healing. And my father's dad, my grandfather, had a very strong psychic abilities as a child. He could see certain things happen before they actually took place as a child, and so he grew up with a lot of what they called, gifts of psychic abilities. On my mother's side, her great-grandparents were, before they came to Brazil even, they already believed in spiritism and channeling spirits and contacting the dead. And that was also used in the type of a healing, white magic sort of belief, because that was believed to be from God. So primarily, I think that covers the first question. They healed the evil eye and things like that.
Ivani, as I was going over your testimony, what struck me was the blatant, the obvious presence of occultic practices. Did your family consider what they were practicing to be occult in nature?
Not at all. No. It was truly, with all sincerity, my family believed that everything we did as far as spiritism was from God. And being able to see into the spirit realm was a gift from Him. We didn't believe in the God of the Bible, but we believed in a God, the New Age type of God, where you believe that God is a force, energy, universal, that kind of thing, an energy in the universe. And then Jesus was a man who walked on earth, who had a very elevated spirit, the most elevated spirit, besides, that he was close to God. And he was also considered a medium, and that's what we believed. He was a very the highest hierarchy of mediumship. and that's why he healed and did all that. And we didn't believe in heaven. We didn't believe in hell. But never did we think, and my family believed that what we practiced was evil. It was always believed to be good. And, my grandparents, they were wonderful, loving people, all of them, that practiced these things. And we were created in a loving environment. There was, someone asked me, there was no animal sacrificing or anything like that. We were deceived, because we were practicing the occult through, Satan, but we believed it was from God. And may I just add something too?
Yeah, sure, sure.
No, and I think because of the healing nature, like we would see good things happen through the practices, because the Bible confirms that. Yes, Satan and his minions, they do have the power. They have certain powers, limited powers, but they do have powers. They'll mimic, they'll counterfeit God's miracles, and that's throughout the Bible. And we experienced healings and miracles and things like that were all counterfeit. We paid a price for it, but at the time we did not. We thought that was a good thing, again, from God. So I'm sorry. Go ahead, Joe.
No. That's very very key to understand what is happening here. Ivani, is there a word that is translated into your language that translates from occult? In other words, in your language, what is occult translated to?
It's the same exact thing, and it's called occultismo, occulto, which means hidden, which means, it's from the Latin. Root. It means occult. It's just like in English. It's something hidden, something that's dark or not seen. So it's the same translation. Yeah.
Okay. Very good.
So we wouldn't consider what we did occultic in nature, which it is, but we didn't at the time.
Yeah, and that is very key to understand as we move forward here. You touched on a little bit Allan Kardec and his influence. He wrote a book. I'm assuming it's called The Gospel According to Spiritism. Could you explain what that is?
Yes. Allan Kardec, he was a French philosopher, teacher in the 1800s, that he basically... So everything we practice stemmed from his teachings, and he wrote many books. For The Gospel According to Spiritism, it was published in 1864. The main goal of this book is to take the teachings of Jesus and twist it into Kardec's own religious philosophies, and his goal was to demonstrate that actually Spiritism clarified and extended the teachings of Jesus, because what Kardec taught and teaches, because it's still a very, very strong following in Brazil, is that the Gospels, the Christian Gospels, were wrong and were not translated correctly, and the spirits gave Allan Kardec's, it was a spirit guide would, tell him what the actual meaning of each gospel or verse was. So he, used the Bible and translated it through his gospel, what the actual meanings of these teachings were. So it just kind of dissects the gospels to fit the spiritualism agenda. So, and only the elevated spirits actually knew what Jesus Christ meant to tell us. We don't know. The Bible is not correct. So that's very dangerous right there, because I never believed in the Bible, ever. Yeah. The Bible to me was not true. mainly because of this.
Joe, I have a follow-up question for Ivani.
Sure.
Ivani, what was Kardec's view of beginnings? As Christians, we believe in a literal.
I believe he was a Catholic.
Uh-huh.
He was a Catholic, but then he started. There was an encounter with someone that was invited him to a seance type of meeting, and after that he became a medium himself, and went on from there with receiving messages from spirits, and it became a huge following. From France it went to Brazil. He also a very important part of the teachings of Kardec and Spiritism is, of course, reincarnation, but also evolution. There's a huge teaching of evolution, Greek philosophy, things like that. Yeah, it's a big mixed bag of different belief systems.
Sure.
Mm-hmm.
How about, were there other influences besides Kardec?
Well, he was as far as what we believed, we grew up, my entire family practiced what we called, it's called white table, and this is before the Umbanda part, we'll get to that later, but the white table, which is spiritism, which it was totally under Allan Kardec's teachings. So that was the main influence for myself and the rest of my family, because that's what we believed in reincarnation and what he taught about the Gospels, and the weekly meetings that were attended. My great grandmother, my grandmother, my mother, my aunts, everyone attended. Not everyone was a medium that channeled, but my grandmother, my great grandmother were. My grandfather was. And then eventually I did too. But it was type of a seance environment where mediums sit around the table, and they have spirit guides that they channel. And they become possessed by them. Here in America they say channeling. In Brazil we say a word that would basically translate to being possessed, but possession we think evil spirit. In Brazil, becoming possessed by a spirit, it was a spirit of light, or a spirit guide, and they would talk through the mediums and give messages, healings, and things like that, prayers, teachings. It was just like going to church. You would have the readings, the prayers, and then they would have the passes, healing passes. It has energy, just like a lot of the people are practicing now, and they just call it different things, Reiki and all the New Age stuff that people practice, thinking that it's all about energy. But where did the energy come from?
Right.
This energy is demonic energy, and people don't understand that.
Yeah, Ivani, you talk about your culture in Brazil believing that possession is a result of spirit guides giving directions for life, and we'll probably get into this later on in the program, but it's not just Brazil; it's here in America today, and I think that you understand that as well as Bill. So that's why we're doing what we're doing tonight, because those sorts of beliefs have if they were concentrated at any one point in any one area geographically in the world, they have certainly spread throughout the world. So that is why we are doing what we're doing tonight, as a warning. Now, Ivani, you describe an experience you had at the age of 5. What was it, and why do you believe you endured this at such a young age?
Right. In my testimony, I described at the age of 5 because that's the clearest memory that I have as a child. But I experienced this even younger from my mother and my dad. They tell me that, you know, I always saw spirits. You know, I always saw the spirit realm. So they believed it was from birth that I had what they called the gift. And why do I believe now as a Christian that this happened to me at such a young age? And again, this isn't, my story is not unique, you know, it's not, there are many people with very, very similar testimonies, even here in the United States, and my family, all over the world. People have, you know, children do have these experiences that I described. They're not unique, but I believe that I experienced these things because as far as what God tells us in the Bible, that I do believe that there is generational curses, that things are passed down to your children. And until, you know, that's broken through coming to Christ and being delivered and you know, just not, you know, and repenting from these practices. So yes, I think that it's a generational thing that was passed down from, I believe that, you know, from generation to generation. 'Cause I don't know how far back it goes, but I can trace it back as far as my great grandparents. So, you know, that's over 100 years ago. So, way over 100 years. So, and their parents practiced it. So God only knows how many generations we were passing down, you know, of these beliefs. So I believe that's what, why, you know, I was and other children in my family also were attacked this way.
Yeah, and when you talk about attacks, sometimes they turn physical, and I think one of the things that really grabs the attention of humanity is when people experience physical attacks, which you describe that you suffered by those that are called the Voltos, or shadow people. Would you describe these physical attacks?
Sure. The worst, Volto is what we call here, they say shadow people. So literally it looks like shadows that I saw all the time. And they would just, a lot, during the day, if I was with someone, it didn't bother me as much. I didn't feel as threatened because I would see these coming and going off and on throughout the day, even in school, even when we're playing outside. You would see the shadowy figures kind of coming and going through walls. A lot of times they kind of just hovered right behind you, which was scary because it was very close up. But the worst physical attack was, and you know, when they're close enough, you have the that response where, you know, you get goosebumps and just chills, and the temperature may drop in a room. But the worst was being asleep as a child, and even as an adult, because it's terrifying for adults who experience this, never mind a little child. But it was a constant thing where I would be sleeping, and we slept, my sister and I slept in a open, like a pull-out couch in Brazil, because it was a one-bedroom home that we lived in. So it was almost a nightly thing where I would be fast asleep and just be awakened by a presence like hovering over me, and it's a very tangible evil sensation that just would, like, I can't, it's even hard to describe it, but what would happen is I experienced sleep paralysis. And I experienced that throughout my life until I was 38 years old and was delivered from this demonic, from being possessed. So what happened is that I would wake up and I was scared to open my eyes, but that's the only thing I had movement were my eyes. I was able to open my eyes, blink, and kind of look around, but everything else was paralyzed. My entire body was paralyzed, and I wouldn't be able to speak. My vocal cords were also paralyzed, and I don't know if you've ever experienced, a lot of adults, a lot of people have that horrible experience once or, a few times during their lifetime. Yeah, and you just feel you're just totally, you have no control. You can't move, you can't speak, and you're at this entity's mercy. Maybe it was a few seconds, a couple minutes, but it felt like an eternity. And you feel like you're going to die, like it's going to kill you because of the threatening. It was so evil. And so I would struggle until I would break free, and the first thing would be a scream that would screech throughout the house. And, my sister was used to it. She was younger than I was, and she would just hug me and just, wait for Mom. And Mom would come, and in Brazil they always give sugar water to calm kids' nerves, and drink the sugar water, it'll be okay. And tomorrow you're going to go see, Grandma, she'll bless you, or we'll go to the Spiritist Center and they'll do a spiritual pass and get rid of the attachments, because we believed in attachment. We didn't believe these were demons. We believed that they were lower level spirits. And I think some of your questions will get to that later on and make more sense for the listeners.
Ivani,
that was... Oh, I'm sorry. And as far as the attacks, also, I'm sorry, Joe.
Okay.
I couldn't be, because I mentioned earlier, because I felt this presence around me all the time. I wasn't able to be alone in a room for almost. If my sister, poor thing, she was my chaperone. She had to go with me everywhere, and she got tired of it. It was being a kid. She wanted to play. She was more of a. I was always a quieter, reserved kid, but she had to chaperone me around the house. And sometimes my mother would just get so angry and just say, you go in the room and you get whatever I'm telling you to go get. And if I was forced to go, or my sister wasn't around, and I had to go do something and go anywhere in the house by myself, I would make myself go, and then I would feel the same presence as I did when the sleep paralysis happened at night. And it would be so threatening and overwhelming that I would just run, literally run with my arms flat, and I would just I would trip, I would fall. It felt like a lot of times I was being pushed. And I would hit walls, I'd hit furniture. I had bruises and scratches all over my legs, always. Growing up, my legs were always covered in bruises, my arms, always. And that was just part of my life. I was always running away from these things, always.
Ivani, I have one question regarding your experiences with the shadow people. Were they always the same type of experience with the sleep paralysis, or at some point were there ever messages, whether they were verbal that you could hear or telepathic or anything like that?
No, I had more telepathic as I got older. When I was little, it was just visual. And then as I started to get a little bit older, even at 5, I was already getting some telepathic messages. I was getting almost, it was weird for a kid to go through that, where you could sense or read somebody's mind, or kind of sense something was going to happen before it happened. Things like that happened, but I didn't have the auditory, what they call gift, where I could hear voices, unless when I was coming with the sleep paralysis, and just coming from that, between the sleeping and awakening, you could hear it sounded like a whole bunch of voices together, kind of overlapping each other, whispering.
Yeah.
And it sounded like a whole bunch of insects, and it was terrifying to hear that. And as soon as I was awake, it would stop. But it was tons of voices just fluttering around, and
Yep.
And that happened throughout my life. Even as an adult, I had that all. And sometimes I would pick up certain things, and as soon as I would be shocked awake with that, it would, what were they saying? What was that? And kind of it would just evaporate from my head. But it was so clear when I was between that sleep and awakened state.
Mm-hmm.
All these different voices. Yeah. I'm sorry. There was something else I think that you asked me about. Did you ask me if they were always the same, as far as physical, the way they looked physically, or just the auditory part?
Yeah, were the experiences always the same, or did they?
No.
Go ahead.
On a regular basis, like a day to day, it was always the same. The voodoo's, the shadow people coming and going, the sleep paralysis and the fear, the threat of feeling like I was being attacked or chased, or had somebody hovering behind me all the time. And it was like I felt like these entities wanted to hurt me. Mm. And then when I was maybe 6 or 7, I did have my first awakened paralysis, just like sleep paralysis, but I was wide awake. Mm. That was the first time it happened, and it was at my great-grandmother's house. And I was very scared of. I don't know if you want me to tell you the story or not, but it's one of the stories in the testimony, because it was the entity. It was the first time I saw a spirit totally take human form, where I could see everything, the clothes, the buttons, not just a shadowy figure, but it was totally. I thought it was a real person. I didn't know it was a spirit. Wow. Or a demon, looking like a man.
Yeah.
And I thought it was an actual man invading my grandmother's yard, my great-grandmother's yard. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, we're going to get to that in the next question, Ivani. Okay. But before we do that, I have to ask a question based on what you've just said about sleep paralysis. And there's a reason for me asking this question, and I'll explain it after I ask it. When you experienced any of the paralysis that you're mentioning, whether it was sleep paralysis or paralysis that wasn't related to sleep, were you on any kind of medication, specifically a psychotropic medication?
Never. Remember, this is in the late 60s in Brazil, mid to late 60s in Brazil, and we were very, very poor. I don't even remember going to a pediatrician until I came to the United States. And I think the most powerful medication I ever had was aspirin. When you got sick, or the only time you'd go if you had a cold or the flu or anything, you'd be taken to the pharmacy, and the pharmacist would give you. But there was not even a consideration for mental illness. This was such a normal thing. I'm sure if it was here in the United States and I had grown up here and I had experienced these things, I would have definitely been put in some kind of medication, or had to, been treated for some kind of psychiatric problem. Yeah, definitely. Mm-hmm. But no, I never had any medication.
The reason that I asked you that, Ivani, was that your description of your sleep paralysis was almost to the point of my experience of sleep paralysis. And, we can give it the heading, the description of sleep paralysis, but it is a demonic attack, a multiple demonic attack. Mm-hmm. And I experienced the same exact thing that you did. And the reason I asked you if you were on any psychotropic medication was to dispel the scientific notion, explanation, as if, someone can come along and say, well, you were under this medication, that's why you experienced that. Now, I was under, I was on a psychotropic medication at the time, Halidol. Mm-hmm. So I never, looking back now, I won't go back and say, well, I experienced that because I was on Halidol. Now, Halidol might have had something to do with opening a door, opening a passageway for demons to get in, but it that wasn't the explanation, and that's why I asked you what I asked you. So no one can say it's a result of medication. It's some sort of experimentation that is done on people while they're in mental hospitals, which I was in. So I wanted to get that out of the way. And, you know, as you were explaining what you were going through, I had chills on my arms because I experienced the same exact thing.
Yeah,
Same
it's
exact
a horrible,
thing. So,
horrible thing to experience, and it is demonic. I know. I'm a nurse, and you know, we'll get to that later. As far as growing up in the United States, and you know, being a professional, that's why I never shared this with anyone, because as a nurse, I am not ever taken. You know, I grew up in the 70s, and I never did any hard drugs ever. So, and this is not to put judgment on anyone, but that people they'll say yes. But and I believe that drugs will open doors to demonic activity.
Absolutely,
but, I mean, I believe that's it's so strong. But as far as experiencing this, I've done a lot of research on it, and as a nurse, it's you know, it's dispelled by the scientific community as it's you know, it's a neurological, it's a narcolepsy and things like that. And trust me, after I was delivered, it never happened again. So
hallelujah.
You know, praise the Lord for that. But definitely, you know, I'm not saying that there are psychiatric problems. Of course there are. You know, there are imbalances of chemicals in the brain that can cause things. I believe in science, but I believe in God first of all, and I believe in the, you know, that we live in a spiritual world. That we're surrounded by spirits, and we need to be very cautious of what we open ourselves to.
That's right. Absolutely.
Bill, did you have something before we moved on?
No, go ahead, Joe.
Okay, all right. This is something that really fascinated. Everything fascinates me about your testimony, Ivani, but this particularly, that there was an incident which compelled your family to develop your skills as a medium. Would you share those circumstances?
Yes, because that's a very, very common thing for people that believe in spiritism. And because first, if you're born with the so-called gift, what happens is you can't develop your talents or skills as a medium to receive these spirits, which, you know, we say receive, channel, be possessed by these spirits, until you're after puberty. And there's all these rules. There are many, many rules, because they know, you know, in spiritism that these practices can cause physical harm to the medium, and you have to be physically, emotionally, mentally developed to be able to become a medium. So there's a certain progress that, and that's a very common thing. You know, it wasn't like, oh, my parents just decided I was going to be a medium. It was because I was born with what they called the gift, and I did see the spirits all the time. There were many people in my family and people that I grew up with, many people here, I'm sure, in the United States that I have experienced seeing. But with me, because it was a constant, everyday thing, and I felt like I had one foot in the spiritual realm, one foot in the, you know, in the physical, that I was, my trajectory in life was to become a medium. That's what God's will for me was, because He gave me the gift to help people. You know, it was always to do good things, to do good works. And my family would take me to the meetings, to what we call the white table meetings, the seance type meetings, to be blessed and to receive healing from the attacks, because the way it was explained was because I had the gift and I was too young to be able to control the spirits. I was like a magnet to inferior spirits that will try to communicate through me, and I didn't know how to handle that. I didn't have the skills, and that's what the development as a medium would do. They would teach me how to be able to differentiate between a low-level spirit, a spirit guide, and then be able to channel and protect myself, and not allow any of the low-level, low-light, or lost spirit of dead people that were kind of wandering around looking for where to go, to come in and attack me, as just because it was like they told me they're not meaning to hurt you, they just want to communicate through you because you have the gift. So you're like a little magnet, and they come and they're not trying to hurt you even though it's scary. So that's what they believed. They didn't do that to hurt me, because that's what they believed was my future, and that was my preparation for it. So
now, Ivani, you explained that the attacks you suffered got worse as you grew older. Was there ever a point when your family thought that something might be wrong with the occult paths that they chose for themselves and for you?
Never. No, because again, it was a progression. It was like, I'm getting closer to the age where I'm going to be able to be trained as a medium. So no, it was not. It wasn't. We never thought. My parents, my grandparents. No one thought, okay, we're doing something wrong, or this is occultic. No, it was like, this is part of the pain of serving. Eventually that will pass. She's going to be able to control the spirits, and she'll be a medium, and she'll be able to control all the attacks, because a spirit guide will be, protecting her, and candles were lit. All these rituals were done all the time for my spirit guide to come closer, to help me. But, again, it's contradictory, because now when you look at it, it's like, that doesn't make sense. How could we believe that? But we really believed that that was the way, and that's just how it was. It wasn't. That's how the spirit world worked, and because I was so young, I would have to wait until I was older to be able to control the situation myself. So it was never thought of, maybe we're doing something wrong. Maybe we shouldn't.
Yeah.
What was thought a lot of times was, maybe there's a curse put on the family, or the evil eye. People are jealous, so it sends evil spirits to hurt you. That we believed in all that stuff too. We also believed in like the Italian belief, where the evil eye, that people can send curses to you and things like that. We believed that all the time. Yeah, that was maybe she wore that dress and somebody looked at her and cast the evil eye on her. So let's take her to the spirits and sentence. That's why she's waking up crying, because that spirit followed her home, because she's a medium. And there was always an explanation, but never, this is a horrible thing. And my parents, again, my whole family, they're the most loving family anyone. I mean, I had a wonderful childhood, except for this horrible, it sounds crazy to say, but my loving, caring family, we had, everything else was normal. We watched TV, we played, we went on vacation, and my mother was a beautiful woman that was so loving to our kids. My father was hardworking, and we had this little poor house. We were poor, but we were always so clean, and she made our clothes, and so there's so much love always. We were happy, except I was miserable with this fear that was like but it was like weird to tell you this, but it was like accepted. It's like, I was taught from as back as I can remember, this is what God meant for you, and it's going to get better. It's going to get better as you get older. You'll be able to control this. So yeah.
Bill, when we do these interviews, it never ceases to amaze me that I hear something, and something that occurs to me, obviously through the leading of the Holy Spirit, that I hear, that just causes me to stop and say, my goodness, I've never seen that before. I've never really considered that before. I've never understood that before. What Ivani was just talking about, the attacks that she suffered, and the things that would be perceived as negative that occurred to her were seen not from her family as something that was a result of engaging in something that was evil, but it was a progression. And when you think of the Satan as a copycatter, how he mimics what the Almighty does and has done. You think of the sufferings that Jesus went through. Now, we understand that Jesus lived a perfect, sinless life, but look at everything that he suffered during his time on earth here. Look at what Paul and John suffered as a result of their obedience to what the Lord called them to do. Look at the sufferings that Paul went through and itemized at certain portions of Scripture as a result of serving the gospel and serving Jesus Christ. It's amazing how, as what Ivani is describing to me, is what they see as a normal progression towards something good as a result of things that are bad that are happening. It's fascinating to me to hear that, because to me it's just another obvious mimic of the way that God works in his servants. None of us, Bill, who serve the Lord will say that, you know what, when I came to Jesus Christ, my life got so great. I had all these things that I never had before, and I never suffered anything, and I did this and I did that. No, I can tell you that as a result of coming to Jesus Christ, that I have endured suffering that I've never known before. But it's all leading somewhere. That's why I'm still doing it. But you guys understand what I'm saying? That there's a mimicking that's going on here. It's amazing to me.
Yeah, that's a great way to explain that. So that's awesome how you explain that. Yeah.
Now, Ivani, you and your family came to America in 1968 to live in Massachusetts. This is really fascinating. I mean, looking at where we are now. Now, you state that your beliefs back then were not something to discuss openly in American culture. Would you elaborate on this a bit? Like, what made you think that you couldn't discuss your beliefs in spiritism or mediumship or contacting spirits? Or what was it about America in 1968 that said, no, don't talk about that?
Right. Well, we lived in a little city called Taunton, Massachusetts. As a matter of fact, a lot of my family still lives there. And that's where my, it's a complicated story. It's too convoluted to explain, but just to give the listeners an idea of why we came to Massachusetts. My father's mother was born in Massachusetts from Portuguese immigrants. Eventually, she ended up in Brazil. She lived in the United States until she was 6, then came full circle in 1966 and came back to America. And we came 2 years later in 68. And her mother always remained in America. She was separated from my great-grandmother from after the age of, she was probably 8 or 9. And again, it's a long story, but she came back to the United States and we came to Massachusetts. Now, Taunton is a very tiny, it's a small city, and back then in the 60s, and this is 1968, where, America was experiencing the New Age revolution, we came right at that explosion of, the age of Aquarius and all that, and all the New Age stuff was coming out. However, remember, we didn't not speak one word of English. We came to live with my great-grandmother, who grew up in the United States in a Portuguese, it was not a neighborhood, but the whole Massachusetts, Rhode Island, New England, they have a huge Portuguese population, so they're very Catholic. Of course, Portuguese people are very Catholic, and so is my great-grandmother. She was Catholic, and when we mentioned a few times, barely mentioned some of the beliefs, they were shocked that you don't believe in that. That's not true. That's not real, and we don't talk about these things here in America because this is not. And I was 9 at the time, so going to school, and I remember all people talked about was going. They would go to church, to mass, Catholic, mostly Catholic. I didn't even know. I was never around that I remember to any evangelical Christians. They're all Catholics. And, we actually got into the Catholic culture for a little bit for traditional purposes. We got First Communion in the United States. We had our confirmation, because that was part of our, the culture that we lived in. But there was no one that we knew in Massachusetts ever talked about spiritism, seances, channeling. No, and then we learned right away, you don't talk about this, because if you do, they're going to think you're, especially in school, don't ever tell anybody that you believe in these things, because, they can take you to a doctor and think you're crazy because these things aren't real. Mm-hmm. And we knew they were real, so we just kept our mouths shut. We didn't share it with anybody. And I felt sorry, like being a little girl, and I lived here until I was 14. I actually felt sorry for people because I thought they didn't know what was going on. And, they were being deceived. I thought they don't know that there's a spiritual world, and they don't know what, that they can actually have these powers or communicate with these people. But there were programs on TV back then. I mean, there always were, that I remember that dealt with, but it was in a comedy type of thing, Bewitched, things like that. Which we thought was really cute. But we never consider ourselves witches. It's like we were medium spiritists, and we believed we all only did good. It was all to the white light. That's it. No darkness, even though it was all demonic. But again, we didn't know.
That's a very good segue into my next question, Ivani. It's one of the things that I had to grapple with as I read your testimony, and even now as I'm listening to your testimony live, is it seems like there was a willful ignorance on the part of your family when it came to the reality of evil and how it manifested itself. So, with that in mind, did your family ever question why paralysis would be associated? Like you described earlier, the sleep paralysis that you had, and also the waking paralysis. Did your family ever question why that would be associated with a visit from the dead, such as occurred with what was believed to be your grandmother's grandfather? How did they see that as a good thing?
Again, when I think back, and I even writing my testimony, I was like, this is insane. But even now, right now, as we speak, there are people in my family that continue to practice these things, and that's exactly what they believe. That it's a good. And now, once you come to Christ, and those scales fall off your eyes, because Satan will blind you to the point that everything makes sense. All his lies make sense. And there's justification for everything. So you're so blinded that everything that's evil looks good. It's just, and you're repelled, literally repelled by anything that's truly from God. Because I can tell you right now, until the age of 38, I don't remember one person witnessing to me. Wow. And I'm not saying that it's because nobody ever tried. It's because the few people that did, I never allowed it to even come close to evangelism because I was repelled by anything that had to do with Christianity.
Mm-hmm.
So, and that's, I believe that's the demonic stronghold that they have. That when people are so involved in these things, that you're totally blinded. You are blinded, and whatever, all these horrible things, they don't look threatening. They don't look bad. They don't look evil. They look like it's a good thing, and it's a progression. And the sleep paralysis is part of the spirit communication process, and that's what happens to you. Don't be scared, and you just accept it. And I know it sounds crazy, but that's how it is. And it's still, I'm sure I recently had a conversation with a cousin that's still practicing it, and she believes with all her heart that it's not evil and it's good. And we're the ones that are being deceived.
Mm-hmm.
So, yeah. You asked about the waking paralysis. I don't know if we talked about that at all, but it's the same thing, and it happened twice. That was as a child that I was awake and I saw an entity that looked very human-like, and I couldn't move, I couldn't talk until the entity left or disappeared. And then I was able to scream out because I was so scared. And once when I was little, I don't know, maybe I was 7, at my great-grandmother's house, and I thought I was an intruder. I was an actual person coming in. And the second time, I was 14 when I returned to Brazil. My grandmother and I actually experienced that together. We actually saw the same thing at the same time. Exactly the same thing. While watching TV, the whole family watching TV together, so... And
yeah, well, that's why I asked that question. Is the fact that it could almost be understood or explained while you're sleeping that these physical attacks would lead to some sort of paralysis. But when in what you described in your waking paralysis was a vision of the sighting of a human form. So that's what led me to question how your family's culture could link an actual, you see a human being that was later determined to be your grandmother's grandfather. But at the same time, when you're seeing this, you're paralyzed, and I'm thinking to myself, how can they not see that as something? If it's a good thing, and your grandmother's grandfather is coming back to see you for some reason, why are you paralyzed?
Yeah. Yeah.
So
I can't answer that. Why it was considered a good thing. It was considered a normal thing. And I guess you can also put paralysis. This paralysis was a trance. But during this trance, it was a trance, and I was totally paralyzed during the trance. So, it's just part of being able to see the spirit realm. And again, I wasn't at the second time because it only happened twice that I was paralyzed awake. And the way I understand it is that, there's such a strong energy in the room that you go into this trance, you're paralyzed, and you're supposed to be receiving a message from that spirit, but because I was still not prepared, that's why my grandmother was angry with me when I was 14 because of my reaction. I was crying and I was afraid still. That by that time I should have understood what was going on, and I should have allowed the spirit to communicate to me, but I was too scared, and I basically scared the spirit away, or he turned away in anger because I wasn't willing to listen to what he was trying to tell me. Even though I still couldn't audibly, there was no auditory ability at all. It was all, gesturing, and, I can still see that. It was just very weird. It was an old man, and she said it was my grandfather. He was just coming to ask us for prayer, and in your reaction, you need to respect the spirit world, And so, what do I do? I don't know what to do. And I had just returned from the United States after being away for 5 years, So I was old enough at that time to begin developing as a medium. because of course I was 14. I had gone through all, I was mature to the point that was a good age to start training. So.
Right. So now you're back in Brazil, and you're invited by your aunts to join them at the Umbanda Spirit Center. Now, this is a tremendous shift in your life. Would you describe what this is, what happens at their Umbanda services, and how this all affected your life?
Yes. Okay, so as I mentioned earlier, my family always practiced white table seance type of healing meetings where you channeled spirit guides. And some of the spirit guides they channel could be, and not just departed souls, like a doctor or a family member. It could also be an Indian guide. So they did also, even in the white table, they did receive some spirit guides that were godlike, But in Umbanda, my aunts had recently joined, and just to put a perspective on this, my grandmother was so angry because she thought we shouldn't. It's just like any religion that you have, you're Catholic all your life, and then somebody becomes a Christian, and they don't believe in certain things that you believe as a Catholic, and your family gets angry because you're breaking that mold. So it was the same thing with my grandmother. Don't go to Umbanda because Umbanda has a lot of. They also worship evil, And I thought, I'm going to go. I want to see what this is all about. My aunts were going, and they were happy. So they took me to it was a small building like a house where the church temple is where the meeting was held, and most Umbanda temples is similar to the description I have in my testimony, which is an open room, a huge room where there's usually the floor cement. It could be dirt floor, but there's a big altar with all the gods. Umbanda worships gods. And just to backtrack a little bit, Umbanda came from Africa to Brazil by the African slaves. They brought this to Brazil. So I don't know if you want me to ask anything before I move on with the Umbanda.
Yeah, sure. Go ahead.
Okay. So the slaves brought this to Brazil that worship these spirits. And the spirit guides were, they each represented a certain element. It could be like the sea, a waterfall, the forest. It could be thunder. And what happened when they came, the Portuguese slave masters that brought them to Brazil didn't want them to worship. They wanted to make them Catholics and teach them, about Catholicism. So the slaves would bury because back then, they were in the coffee fields. They would bury their gods. They'll make statues of each god that represented each different element, and they would bury them under the altar where the slaves had to worship the Catholic saints. And they would bow down to the altar, and the slave masters thinking that they were bound to Catholic saints, but they're actually worshiping their own gods that were buried on the ground. So each saint eventually was connected to one of their gods. So Iemanjá, which is the sea goddess, was connected to the Virgin Mary. There's Saint Anthony that's connected to. Each saint would be connected to a different god. So anyway, so the temple has drums, one on each side. All the gods are set up on this altar, candles, and all the mediums wear white clothes and beads representing their spirit guides, the color, because each guide has a color. And it's pretty to look at. You have all these flowers and colors and music and drumming, and it's very, when you first walk in, it looks pretty, you know. It's like it looks holy almost, but what happens is it's separated. People that come to be healed or to receive messages from the spirit guides, they sit just like in a church, you know, in pews, and the where the mediums are separated by like a little fence or a gate, so people won't go through until they're invited, and that's like the holy ground. And there are candles, incense, music. The drumming starts to call in the spirit guides, and the mediums become possessed by them, and they dance and, you know, twirl around and sing, and then the patients, you know, they're called patients, the people that come to receive the healing passes, they'll line up and be seen, like have a consultation with each medium and their spirit guide for healing, for breaking of curses, for financial help, you know. And they would say, oh, go home and light this candle for this god, offer, you know, go offer some flowers for this god, or give perfume or some alcohol or cigars. And so that was once a week we would attend, and that's when I started developing as a medium. And I was told by the main medium, they call Pai de Santo, which means Father of God, Father of Saint, I guess you could translate it literally to. He told me when he first met me that my spirit guide was from the sea, and I came from the water, so it's what they call the water spirit. So that's what I had. That was my spirit guide, and that's what I needed to develop, receiving and allowing, you know, learning how to that entity take over my body and control it to where I would be able to do the healing passes, and so that's how where my mediumship training started, in the Umbanda temple.
Ivani, I would say that most Americans would not be familiar at all with what Umbanda spiritualism is. But in Brazil, would you say, and maybe you can elaborate on the rest of South America, how prevalent is the Umbanda religion? Is it up there with Catholicism?
Oh, yes, probably. We all called ourselves Catholics in Brazil. It's traditional, but we never went to church unless it was a wedding, or, and I'm speaking for my family primarily, but most Brazilians that I know were the same. And they either practice spiritism, the white table, Umbanda, and there's others. There's like Kimbanda, there's Candomblé, there's tons of different, but, you know, similar. And it all came from either Europe or from Africa, and prevalent. It's so prevalent that these gods that I mentioned, like Iemanjá, for example, you know, she represents. Everybody knows who Iemanjá. Any Brazilian, you can ask who these gods. They know. Any Brazilian will know it. It's like very much like Santeria, which Americans are a little bit more familiar with, maybe because of you know, it's exactly like Santeria. Actually, the names of the gods are even the same. We went to Cuba last year, and they they worship the same gods that we worshipped in Umbanda. They just have different names for the religion. So why in the Caribbean are they worshiping these same gods? In other countries in South America, even Puerto Rico, you know, the islands, because all these places were the slaves were brought to Latin America and the Caribbean to work the land, and they brought with them these beliefs, these gods. So they're all the same, you know. And so yes, it's very, very prevalent, very well known. You see statues all over of these saints. Like if you go to the beach, they're all over. It's nothing for you to go and see somebody worshiping at the beach. or having a they worship. They actually have services on the beach. And one big example, if you anybody can Google it, on the 1st of every year, January 1st or 31st, it's one of the biggest Iemanjá. She's celebrated. So in places like Rio de Janeiro, Copacabana, the entire beach for miles will be lit up with candles and people worshiping her and dancing and making offerings to her for a good year. So they'll give her perfume, flowers. So the beach will be littered with candles and flowers and little boats with offerings of perfume and combs and mirrors and things like that to her. This is done like now, right now. This is not something that people did, hundreds of years ago. It's like if you go this year to Rio de Janeiro, and it's not just in Rio, it's everywhere in Brazil. And I'm sure the Caribbean countries do the same thing too. Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Let's talk a little bit about America today, Ivani. Describe the differences from 1975 when you returned to America to the present when it comes to this culture's participation in occult beliefs and practices. How did we get to where we are now?
I scratched my head because even 21 years ago, it was already becoming more. But I remember, 21 years ago when I became a Christian, it wasn't as prevalent as it is now. It's just exploding. And I believe there are many reasons for it, but I truly believe that one of the main reasons it's so popular is because of Hollywood just glamorizing it. And almost every other show on TV, every other movie, if you look at the programs on TV, there's so little programs that don't have some kind of occult theme to it. Mm-hmm. And if it doesn't, there will be something within the program that will bring in, like a lot of these reality shows. They'll have people, these movie stars, they'll speak about, I did saging, smudging, like, I'm going to sell my house, and, this house, it's cursed. I'm going to do and these people in Hollywood, they do all these occult stuff openly in the New Age, and it's all considered, alternative medicine, and it's all related to spiritism, to occult, to demonic, influences. I think it's since the 60s, the New Age movement, the Age of Aquarius, the spirituality beliefs spread, and it's been it's in schools, social circles, and all over TV, all over movies, and people love it. I think that just it's very seductive, to especially children. They sell Ouija boards as a game for kids. That's a portal for demons to come into your house, and it just breaks my heart that people just don't realize what they're doing. And it's just, I feel like America has taken this in as an entertainment thing, go see a medium, and it's just the fascination with, being able to connect, and these demons are so deceiving that, imagine you lose a loved one, and you see so many Christians go talk to a medium because they feel like they can they really can communicate to someone they love that was gone, because that medium was able to say, like these mediums on TV, you have such and such a thing inside your drawer, or she liked that color, she wore this perfume, or he smoked that cigar, whatever, that nobody would know randomly. Right. And how do they know this? Because the demons are there. They've been here since the beginning of time, and they follow us everywhere. And they'll lie, and they'll and for Christians to fall for that is so dangerous. And another thing, also, I believe, and I think that I'm sure that you guys have a lot to say about that as well. You know, Christians, that the church barely touches on. Very rarely will a pastor teach about yoga or any of these practices. You know, this is not good because it's connected to other belief systems.
Yeah.
It's not a joke, and for these pastors, they don't preach this. They don't teach people about. It's our responsibility, but I think that you go to church also to, you know, you have a pastor to teach and to, you know, that's why they're pastors, you know, to help the flock go the right path. But people are just falling off cliffs, you know, following these wrong teachings. And again, I don't think these people do it because they're evil or because they mean harm. They do it because it's enticing and, you know, it's real.
Yeah.
Bill, how much time do we have left?
We have about 15 minutes, Joe.
15?
15, yes.
Okay, what are you thinking at this point? Are we going to slice this into 2 shows, or are we going to try to...
Yeah, I think we should slice it into 2 shows. There's just so much here. You know, we haven't even gotten into the part where Ivani gets delivered, so I don't think we're going to get to that.
The best part, right, Bill?
Yeah, that's right, amen. So, yes, I totally agree, Joe, that we need to get a second show for this.
Right, I agree. So, how do you want to handle the last 15 minutes, brother?
Well, actually, let's do this. Let's take a few minutes here and let's pray. You know, Joe, maybe you can go first, Ivani, and then I'll wrap up, and then we'll give out Ivani's contact information, and then we'll prepare for part 2 next week. Sound good?
Thanks, Bill. Yeah, I think that's a great idea. Great idea.
Okay.
Yeah, okay. All right. Father in heaven, thank you for this time tonight. Thank you for the interview with Ivani. Thank you for her testimony. Thank you for the work that you've accomplished in her life, for the countless numbers of lives that have been affected by her testimony, for the work that has been accomplished because of all of the experiences that she has had in her life. Lord, we don't hide our pasts. We don't hide the things that we were involved in, but we talk about them. We bring them out into the open because we want to bring glory to you. We want to honor you because you brought us from a point of darkness and depravity to life in Jesus Christ. You brought us from darkness to light and from death to life. And Lord, we want to celebrate that. And everything that we do, everything that we talk about when we go onto the radio, when we write down our testimonies on the internet, on blogs, is a celebration of what you've done in our lives. It is a time to give thanks for such a great, merciful, and gracious God that, you know, in the midst of our darkness and our depravity and our evil, you drew us out of that. We heard your call, we followed, and by your grace and your mercy, you saved us. And now, Lord, as a result of that, we want to do the same for others. We want to be a part of their drawing out of darkness. And for those who are listening tonight, who may be caught up in the occult, who may be enticed and in the middle of all the occultic dealings that Ivani explained tonight, we are trusting that you're going to draw them out of that, Father, as a result of tonight, and you're going to continue to work in their lives. So it was with great praise and thanks that we give to you for having Ivani on tonight. And we look forward to the second part of our interview with her, and it has just been an eye-opening experience for Bill and myself tonight, and I'm sure for those listening. So, Lord, all we can do is fall down to our knees and give thanks to the one who has drawn us out of such a thick and evil darkness into the great grace and light and forgiveness and love of Jesus Christ, who gives life to those who will receive it. Thank you, Lord, in Jesus' name. Amen.
Amen. Amen. Thank you, Heavenly Father. I thank you for Bill, for Joe, for the faithfulness in this program. I pray for all the listeners. I pray for anyone that is involved in the occult in any way, that Jesus Christ will reveal the occult nature of the demonic spirits that are deceiving. And any action can be as little. It looks small, but it's big for God, because nothing that's occult in nature is from God. I just pray that the Lord opens their eyes and that they reach out to Him and ask Him to show them the truth, the way, and the life. I thank you, Father, for this opportunity to share my testimony. I praise you. I thank you for your mercifulness, for your love, for your grace. We don't deserve your love, but you've come and you've rescued us and all of us. And I just praise you every day for this, Father God.
Amen.
For the last 21 years, Lord, thank you. Thank you for your mercifulness in all our lives. And I pray that the same for anyone out there that's listening that hasn't reached out, for Lord Jesus to please touch anyone that's lost and bring them to your heart, Father. In the name of Jesus, I pray and I thank you again. Amen.
Amen. Amen.
Father God, I rejoice tonight with my brother Joe and my sister Ivani, and give you thanks and praise for the opportunity to come onto the air tonight to talk about these things that are close to your heart. You make it clear in your word that in Deuteronomy 18 specifically, Father, that to involve ourselves in occultic practices is an abomination in your sight.
Yes.
And as both Joe and Ivani talked about tonight with people that are still involved in this, Lord, we ask that you would speak to their hearts through this program. I pray that in your infinite wisdom and mercy that you would lead someone to listen to the podcast who has involved themselves in these practices and are presently in chains, trapped by demonic forces who are preventing them to come to a knowledge of the truth that is only found in Jesus Christ. I pray that you would break those chains for that person, that they would come to a saving knowledge of Jesus Christ, leaving behind the hidden things, the things that only break your heart, and that you would lead that person to Christ. For it is only in Christ that there is freedom. It's only in Him that we find restoration with you, completeness. I pray that you would lead that that one to be a voice, as Ivani is, for the gospel of Jesus Christ. That for what you have accomplished in their lives, they would forever praise you.
Yes.
And Lord, I give you thanks for what you did in Ivani's life 21 years ago, what you did in Joe's life 20 years ago, and in mine as well 20 years ago, leading us out of darkness and into the light and life that is in Jesus Christ. Thank you, Lord. We look forward to next week when we will be with our sister again. And Father, I pray that you prepare hearts to hear the second part of her testimony, and that they would be so moved to bow the knee, repent, and come to you. And we'll give you the thanks in Jesus' name. Amen.
Amen, Bill.
Amen. Thank you.
Well, Ivani, we want to thank you so much for tonight, and for your willingness to come back next week and to come to, as you said earlier here, the best part, when we find what Jesus did for you in breaking those chains and leading you out of darkness and into light. So we so look forward to next week, and
thank you.
We'll be in contact during the week. Okay.
Okay, Bill. It was such an honor and a pleasure, and I'm just so grateful to God for this opportunity. You know, it's just God is an awesome God.
Yes, He is.
He loves us all, so He wants to save us all. So.
Amen. Ivani, could you?
Amen. Thank you, Ivani.
Thank you. Go ahead, Bill.
Yes.
I'm sorry.
Could you give out your contact information, how someone would be able to read your testimony on the internet?
Yes, and before, real quick, I just want to say I pray all the time for LAURA Maxwell and her ministry, because she was she was a greatly used instrument in my life to encourage me to write the testimony, because I was very, and she just inspired me with her own testimony.
Yes.
And Mark Hanneman also was always such a support for me throughout this past year and a half, maybe almost 2 years that it took me to write it. So I just, pray for them. I know that you know them, and they're just wonderful servants of the Lord, and I just pray for their ministry. So, yes, my contact is Ivani Greppi. It's I-V as in Victor, A-N as in Nancy, I-G-R-E-P as in Paul, P again, I, .wordpress.com. IvaniGreppi.wordpress.com. And my testimony is there, and it's also in Laura Maxwell's site, which is ourspiritualquest.com.
Wonderful.
And I think those are the best two places to find it right now. Mm-hmm.
Very good. Well, again, Ivani, thank you so much, and
thank you,
and thanks for bringing Laura and Mark's name into this, because they're dear friends of ours, brothers and sisters in Christ, and we value them so much, and we're thankful for them for being a support for you. To be able to write your testimony out, and as I stated in the beginning of the broadcast, such a powerful testimony. It's one that I strongly urge everyone who can access that on the internet to go there and read it, because it will certainly bless their souls.
Amen. Thank you, Bill. Thank you, Joe.
All right, so sister. We'll catch up with you next week. Ivani, enjoy the rest of your night, and thanks for being with us here on Answers for the Paranormal.
Thank you. God bless both of you and your ministry.
God bless you too.
Thank you, Ivani.
Amen.
Good night.
Amen. Bye-bye.
Bye. Joe, this is 2 in a row now where I find myself just, being a spectator as we were with Jerry when he was on. Just Ivani's her demeanor, her gracefulness.
Mm-hmm.
It was very, very eye-opening for me tonight.
Bill, I think that we touched on some areas that probably we were somewhat familiar with, but to the degree how it saturated a culture, and it continues to do so today, not only in Brazil but here in America. I don't think that we've been in this ministry for 8 years now, Bill. I think that we're learning things all the time about how pervasive and how ubiquitous the extension is of Satan's occultic realm. So I think that we learned some things tonight from Ivani that help us to understand exactly what we're dealing with and how severe the issue is, and she just touched on at the very end how of all the people in the world to ignore this issue, for Christianity to ignore it to the degree that they have. We'll get into that a little bit more in the next interview with Ivani. Is really tragic because there is no other group of individuals who are going to expose this for a satanic scheme, for the satanic scheme that it is. Mm-hmm. So, we learned some things from Jerry and from Ivani this week and last week that really should shake us to our very cores and make us stand at attention. And
that's right.
And if you're a believer, listening to these programs, what it ought to do it ought to compel you. It ought to give you boldness to go out into your own sphere of influence, mm-hmm. and address these issues where you can address them. When these issues come up, to not shy away from these discussions for any fear, because if you're a believer, you need to expose these schemes for what they are. Amen. And again, the reality is that they are so pervasive, they are so ubiquitous, they are reaching children, as Ivani touched on tonight.
Yes.
They are reaching young adults. They are reaching middle-aged adults. They're reaching senior citizens. There is no group of individuals, there is no demographic that is not affected by the occult. And as Ivani touched on earlier in the program, and it's interesting because I asked her, I wasn't aware that there is no translation into her language for the word occult, which means hidden knowledge. Mm-hmm. So it's out there in the open. It's kind of an oxymoron, hidden out there in the open. Please, folks, come back and listen to the second part of our interview with Ivani, as she will finish out the first portion and get into the area where she actually experiences her deliverance from the grip of these demons, and is brought into a saving knowledge of Jesus Christ by a faithful pastor from Brazil. So,
yes.
Really really fascinating tonight, Bill.
Yeah, it was. You know, Joe, you used the word severe a couple minutes back, and I don't think that we can be any more clear than that about how severe it has become in our culture. The occult practices, and Ivani touched on it. You know, it's in all kinds of programming. You know, we've seen it in the Super Bowl halftime shows. You know, and dare I say, in our children's programming. So, you know, this is a serious situation that has taken its grip on our culture today. You know, and you think back to the 60s when all this started, in its present form that it is today. You know, it's always been there, even back in the time of Israel. You know, the surrounding nations were all practicing these things, but to the degree that present day new age spiritualism, you know, has taken its grip on our culture today. This is something that needs to be exposed, and you know, and as Ivani said, and we've said, and Mark and others about, you know, how impotent the body of believers have been in addressing this, you know, and especially for pastors speaking from the pulpit to this. You know, it's something that we do need to engage ourselves in exposing it, and you know, it's a lot of it's subtle in so many ways, Joe. You know, and I fear as though, you know, many Christians have fallen into the trap as well, and I think Jerry brought that up last week in saying that, you know, that Christians are starting to conform themselves to the culture instead of the other way around, transforming, as Romans 12:1 and 2 talk about, you know, by the renewing of our minds, and that's really where it's at, Joe. You know, we as Christians need to be on the forefront of this battle and not succumb to the war that's going on, not shrink back from it.
And you know, Bill, the interesting thing is about the occult. Again, it means hidden knowledge. Sometimes it's not so hidden. Sometimes it's it's right there in the open for us to see. It may be hidden initially, but what I would call the prophets and the prophetesses of the occult religions are brought out into the forefront. And you know, we've shared before, and we did a program on the Phoenix Lights and how we had opportunity to attend a MUFON conference in Philadelphia, and one of the speakers being a doctor from Phoenix, a Lynn Kitai, who experienced the Phoenix Lights phenomenon back in 1997, and since has toured the nation and spread the word about and Mrs. Kitai used the exact same words that Ivani used tonight. She used spirit guides. How Lynn Kitai would describe her spirit guides coming to her after this initial what she believed to be a UFO encounter in 1997 in Phoenix, that her spirit guides would give her knowledge, and that it progressed to the point where Lynn Kitai would wake up in the middle of the night and go, if you remember this, Bill, she said she would go downstairs and she would get a piece of paper and a pen, and she would she would begin writing, and what we now know as automatic writing, she attributed to her spirit guides giving her direction. She said after I don't know how long it was, half an hour, whatever, she would look at this piece of paper and all these things were scribbled down on it. And what we understand now, coming from that, as to be a demonic manifestation in the form of aliens, which then transformed into spirit guides, and then took the form of Lynn Kitai's mother appearing to her in photographs. So it's interesting to see how Ivani talked tonight about the progression that occurs within spiritism,
yes,
and how they ignore all of the negative things that happen to them, and they see them actually as good things.
Right.
Well, the same things are going on in our culture today, and this Lynn Kitai is a doctor. She's a physician, and she, at that time, Bill, and I don't know how far she got, but she wanted to bring this knowledge into the public school system about being visited by aliens. So this isn't something that is reserved to a fringe element of humanity. These are professionals that are they're propaganda ministers for occult beliefs and practices. And I think that, Bill, we've only scratched the surface of what is truly out there. There's only so much, Bill, that we really can avail ourselves of, because we all have lives to lead. We can't be on the computer researching 24 hours a day. So it's amazing when we come upon somebody like Ivani who can share her experiences with the occult. And the thing that I come away with, Bill, is that this is generational. I mean, this is like something that's handed down from grandmother to mother to daughter to granddaughter, and then the recycle repeats itself, and it's all seen as. And Ivani talked about this. I asked her about Umbanda as a religion. It's right up there with Catholicism.
Yeah,
it's a syncretation of Catholicism. So,
yes.
And we can see that occurring here in this country, not with just Catholicism, folks. It's with, you want to call it Protestantism, go ahead and call it that. But these beliefs and practices are inching.
Joe? Hello, Joe, you there? Try and get Joe back.
Hello?
Hi, Ivani. Sorry about that.
Hello?
I lost. We lost Joe, so I was trying to get him back on here, and got you.
I'm here, Bill.
Oh, you're there? Okay.
Okay, you want me to hang up, guys?
Yeah, get out of here.
Ivani is still with us?
I'm back.
She's back.
You can't get rid of me.
How did this happen?
I don't know. The phone just rang and I saw Pennsylvania. I'm like, doesn't look like the same number, but let me answer. Okay. I don't know if you guys need to talk to me or I'll hang up, get out of the conference call.
Well, we were still going on talking about all these things, Ivani. I don't know, and I got cut off somehow, Bill. I don't know how that happened.
It just happened, Joe. Just another one of the. I don't know. I don't recall exactly what you were saying at that point, but
well, that's a problem. Neither do I.
Yeah. Well, someone unseen didn't want anyone else to hear what you were going to say, so they cut you. But
well, let me just say this.
Stay on the line?
No, absolutely no.
Oh.
No. So, Bill, you called Ivani inadvertently?
Yeah, I called back. I tried calling you, and apparently Ivani's number was attached to the conversation still, so that's why. Ivani,
while you're on the line, I just want to say, since you hung up, when Bill and I have been talking back and forth, we are really building up the second part of our interview. So,
yes,
whenever you're ready, we'll be ready.
Awesome. All right.
Okay?
Next week, let's see. Wednesdays and Fridays are the best days because I usually those are the days I don't watch my granddaughter. But sometimes I have appointments, so I think I'm free next Wednesday and next Friday. So whatever works.
I'll leave that up. I'll leave that up to you and Bill, Ivani. I'll open up any night.
Okay. What works best for you, Bill, for next week?
A little too early for me to tell at the moment, but
okay.
I'm leaning towards Wednesdays right now, so I'll be back in touch to let you know.
Okay.
All right.
Sounds good then.
Okay.
Well, thanks again, guys. That was really wonderful, and my husband was listening to it in his office. He said it was he really enjoyed it. So.
Awesome.
Wonderful.
And he said you guys are really great. He just, I think he loved the joke at first about the climate change. He loved that. I heard him laughing from here. So, all right.
All right, we'll come up with more of those for next week.
Thanks, Yvonne.
God bless.
Good night.
Guys. Thank you.
Okay.
Good night.
You too,
Bye-bye.
sister. Bye-bye.
Bye.
Okay.
So, Bill, I assume we're off the air?
No, we're on, Joe.
We're still on the air.
Yeah, we're still on. You were getting to a good point there regarding Lynn Kitai, but I can't, for the life of me, remember exactly what you were saying at that point. But
well, you know what? Neither can I, Bill. That's what happens, I guess, when you get to my age.
Yeah.
You just you get on a roll, and then you get somebody cuts the feet out from under you, and then darn it, you just don't remember where you were.
That's right.
No, I think in all sincerity, we were just talking about how serious this issue is, and how it has permeated our lives. I think you were talking about how it has wormed its way in. The occult has wormed its way in it's demonically into mainstream America, where really, Bill, if you think about it, if you don't go along with certain things, you're seen as an oddball, really. If you question things, you're seen as like someone, like you're not progressive, you're old-fashioned, you've got problems, maybe you have mental problems. If if you think that there's such a thing as heaven and hell, maybe you have mental problems. If you believe in such things as the cross, that there's such a thing as sin and a penalty for sin, maybe you need help. If you believe that there's anything wrong with spirit guides, or I think that's where we left off with Lynn Kitai.
Yeah, you're right.
Out there in Arizona. And I was talking about how it progressed. Mm-hmm. That's exactly where I left off. She got to the point where she touched on every paranormal subject under the sun that she was personally involved with.
Right.
So it's not just confined to the Brazilian culture or a South American culture. It has gone full force. It's full blown into American culture, and Ivani touched on this, that it's got its way. Perhaps it started through Hollywood, through the entertainment industry, and it's been mainstreamed. It's absolutely been mainstreamed. And she touched on evolution. We can touch on abortion. We can touch on homosexuality. All of those things have been mainstream. Wait, you don't? You think there's something wrong with homosexuality? Lesbianism? Well, if there's something wrong with you, then. Yeah. Abortion? That's a woman's choice. You think there's something wrong with that? Then there's something wrong with you. You know, it's the mainstreaming of satanic realities that have taken a hold of our culture, Bill, and it's manifested in so many different ways. You know, we just scratched the surface tonight. So, you know, as a result of Ivani's testimony and Jerry Blaze's testimony and those interviews, you and I will probably do a show on our own and touch on all the things that weren't touched on.
Yes.
So, I mean, you know, as we were asking questions to Ivani, I had to bite my tongue because I kept looking at the clock, saying, you know, I'm only up to such and such a question. We have to kind of get through these. You know, I don't like doing it like that. So,
yeah,
there's a lot that's left out that I know needs to get to be addressed. So, that's where we're doing a second part with Jerry, a second part with Ivani, and then subsequent programs with just you and myself. So, you know, I just want to thank everybody for listening tonight.
Yes.
Hanging in there. And we look forward to the second part of those interviews.
Yes, we certainly do. And that's a good lead-in, Joe, to announcing for our next broadcast, which will be Saturday night, this coming Saturday. What is that, Joe? April 7th?
It's April. That's all I know.
April. So this coming Saturday night, April the 7th at 7:30, we'll be on again with Jerry Blaze in part 2 of our interview with him. And if you listen to part 1, you'll definitely want to be tuned in for part 2, because that was an explosive interview we had with our brother Jerry regarding his involvement with Satanism and how he was delivered out of that by Jesus Christ. So you'll want to tune in again on Saturday night to hear the second part of the interview with Jerry. So with that, Joe, thanks again for tonight. Excellent job in leading the discussion, and look forward again to being with you on Saturday.
Thank you, brother. Thank Ivani again, and yeah, man, I can't wait. I can't wait.
All right, great. Well, thanks again for tuning in tonight to Answers for the Paranormal, and we'll catch you again on the weekend. Good night, everyone, and have a great day tomorrow. Night, Joe.
Good night, brother. God bless to all listening.
Yes, amen.